And remember, in Reykjavik, that did not work out as well as some people thought. But eventually, as it progressed over time, what happened? The wall came tumbling down. There's been a lot of talk about, well, will they be talking beyond denuclearization about human rights? Will they be talking about possible reunification of North and South Korea sometime down the line? All of those issues, I'm sure, will be discussed at some point. But as the president was very clear when he left Washington, he was saying this is a process. There will be nothing signed here, he said. He said this might take 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings or maybe even more, but it's certainly worth it if we can make the world a safer place. But again, the core argument and mandate of the United States in this is very clear. It is complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. All right, joining us now, we have Dr. Sebastian Gorka, Sarah Carter, and you see this pool behind us? Danielle Hoffman was swimming in it at 3 a.m. local time 6 hours ago, doing laps, and I was up with you, so that's how I know. Good to see you. The goal is noble. We have so much that has happened leading up to this, which should give the world hope. There's no guarantees here at all, but the fact that North Korea took all of those steps, hostages released, missiles stopped being fired, they're willing to talk about denuclearization, all of that, and they knocked down one of their nuclear test sites. That's a pretty big concession just to get here.
There's a lot of steps that have been taken already. I think the long-term question is whether Kim Jong-un wants to cash in his nuclear weapons capability and the ICBM capability for food, for energy assistance, and ultimately for integrating his economy into the region and the world. And those questions remain to be answered, but what we know today is that the president is taking the precursor step, which is to establish the relationship with Kim Jong-un, on which everything depends.
You know, there was one political point, Dr. Gorka, and I'll bring it to you because you worked in the Trump White House that Kellyanne was just making before this. You know, it's interesting. Every economic measure in 500-plus days is fairly remarkable, especially compared to 8 years of Obama. Everybody that said Donald Trump couldn't win the primary, couldn't win a general election, that thought Trump's economy would tank, and that this day would never occur because he called him Little Rocket Man and talked about fire and fury. If they had any intellectual honesty, a lot of people, Democrats and in the media, would be eating crow. But many politically, sadly, they don't want this to be successful because that hurts them in November.
Bill Maher wants the American economy to tank, just to
He said so, recession.
Right. So Einstein made the speed of light famous with his equation. I think now we're going to have to talk about the speed of Trump. Think about what has happened in just 500 plus 10 days. It is truly remarkable, from the crushing of the ISIS caliphate to the economic growth to a 75% decrease in illegal migration, on and on and on. And now, think what's happened in just a matter of a few weeks. A couple of months ago, we were talking about potential fire and fury on the Korean Peninsula. Today, on the anniversary of Reagan's Brandenburg Gate speech, where he said, tear down this wall, I doff my cap to my White House former colleagues to choose June 12th, right, big day, we may be moving from fire and fury to potential peace and posterity.
The similarities here are remarkable. And I know there's a whole generation that weren't watching when Reagan met Gorbachev and when Reagan walked away from Reykjavik. And when he gave that speech, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, his own advisors didn't want him to say that.
They tried to remove it 6 times.
At least 6, right?
And he had to manually write it in there as he was riding on the beast to the event. You know, the swamp is an old phenomenon, Sean. It's been around for a long time.
No, that feels like the swamp because it's more humid here in Singapore than any place I've been in a long time. But the similarities are remarkable. But it wasn't just tear down this wall. It was the evil empire. It sounds a lot like Fire and Fury, and it sounds a lot like Little Rocket Man.
It was the Iron Curtain. It was bringing down that Iron Curtain and the Reagan Doctrine. And remember, this didn't just happen overnight, just like North Korea right now. It doesn't happen overnight. This is weeks and weeks of preparation, months of preparation. In November, Kim Jong-un launched the ICBM. I mean, the ICBM went over 2,700 miles into space. Think about that, Sean. The space station is 250 miles up.
Right.
This was a really direct threat. It was a real warning, and that's why the Fire and Fury statement came up. This is the first step. It's historic.
My button's bigger than yours, and it works.
That's right. My button's bigger, and that's what they were doing. Here we have these two men really challenging one another. But there's something more important that's happening here. This is the beginning of something very important. An isolated nation, like you've described so much, Daniel, in all of your work. An isolated nation coming out, coming to the forefront, and the president saying, look, we're giving you a chance. We're reaching out to you. Do you want to take this opportunity, or do you want to go back to November, fire and fury?
Daniel, you have been really remarkable from the get-go. You have been warning people, especially the White House, in your own way, and you've been making the point, don't manage expectations here. And I think very early on, the president rightly, look, Kim Jong-un's unpredictable. Nobody expected him to cross the DMZ into the arms of the South Korean president, but it happened. And the president was very clear. Don't expect anything signed. 2, 3, 4, 5 visits. Maybe I'll invite him, maybe I won't. I'll size him up probably in a minute. Like he probably did all his business life. As he said, I prepared my whole life for this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the president followed a really smart path. We sent Secretary Pompeo to Pyongyang for 2 visits to size up Kim Jong-un and see the extent to which he was serious about conducting negotiations. I think at the forefront of Kim Jong-un's calculus is that his nuclear deterrent is important for his regime's security. He saw what that meant to fellow autocrats Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi and their own regime security when they lacked that deterrent. And I think that that's something that we have to get past.
One of the things that has been on their side that he's definitely looking for, okay, what assurances do we have that if they need the economic assistance? One of the Chinese papers had an article that the delegation of Kim Jong-un is eating $35 buffet breakfast, which is the monthly salary of the average person. I mean, people are starving in North Korea, and at some point that becomes an existential threat to the regime too. So he's going to have to decide, okay, will the assurances of the United States and China be enough to make me give it up? Yeah.
But that's why it was genius. I'm going to find out who did it, but whoever had the plan yesterday to take Kim to the Singapore Bay Sands Resort. We were there the day before. We checked it out. 57 stories tall. This unbelievable building, the opulence, what you can do in Singapore in the matter of just a few years. And they showed this to Kim. Can you imagine what he's thinking right now? Wow, this is the West. This is free markets. This is democracy. They planted a seed in his mind that, okay, perhaps we could have this on the Korean Peninsula. It's genius. It's utter genius.
You know, one of the other things is, and this is all part of the lead up to this, it was very interesting. The president, that is his sort of power pose, if you look, if you notice with Prime Minister Trudeau, all of a sudden he was sitting back, and then he saw President Trump leaning forward like this, and he went into that. The president smiling, they're both smiling. These are the niceties. This was all planned in advance, orchestrated in advance. One interesting point, there's a differing philosophies as it relates to foreign policy. There's a philosophy of Reagan, peace through strength, trust but verify. The Berlin Wall came down. Then there's the philosophy of Bill Clinton. He tried to bribe Kim Jong-un's father, Kim Jong-il, with $3 billion in energy subsidies, and he told the American people, he said, this is a good deal for the American people. It wasn't. He got nuclear weapons. And just like there's no cargo planes being sent here of cash and other currencies like Obama sent to the mullahs in Iran. A very big philosophical divide about how to approach these people.
Absolutely, and failed sanctions. You know, talk, and what we see is they continually proliferate their nuclear capabilities. We saw that in Syria when North Korea was actually assisting the Syrian regime in the building of a nuclear plant, which the Israelis went ahead and took out. And we see that consistently, you know, with some leaders, a very strong, determined leadership, something presented by President Trump. Reagan was very good at this. Is what affects them. It's what takes them at hold. And you had mentioned, what is it going to take for Kim Jong-un to kind of move into this century to give his people what they need? And economically, I think right now, we're seeing that he's had that for some time. He went to Switzerland. I mean, he was in school in Switzerland. This isn't somebody that was isolated from the rest of the world. He just wanted the rest of the world's respect. Now it's going to be difficult. Human rights abuses in North Korea are staggering, and there's a lot that he has to make up for. That's right.
Actually, but you know, one step at a time.
Yeah, this is one.
I would agree that needs to be a part of the conversation. But if you can if denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula occurs, we have a safer world, a better world. Rockets not flying over Japan. It's a better, safer world. To what extent, Daniel Hoffman, did the president's sanctions and the president strike brigades off the Korean coast, do you think have an influence on Kim Jong-un?
Oh, I think a very serious and significant impact. Those are a two-pronged offensive. You know, the contrast couldn't be greater. We're sitting in the middle of one of the most economically vibrant regions on the planet, and North Korea is the outlier. Singapore is the prototype, and it's not just Kim Jong-un who's taking it all in, it's everyone who's traveling with him. And Kim Jong-un has to balance the fact that his economy is in free fall. That threatens his regime greatly. And he has to think about that, coupled with the United States' determination to mount this deterrent that we've made very clear to him that we will be responding very seriously in the event of any military activity from North Korea.
There's one other thing, and I want you to add to that, Dr. Gorka, if you can. And I also think one unbeknownst little factor here, if you go back to when the president was meeting with the Chinese president, very actually fascinating and interesting, because meetings that were supposed to be 15, 20 minutes went on 5 hours. There's a story that the president tells that when he was at dinner with the Chinese president, that was the night of the first Syrian strike,
right
after President Assad had used these weapons against his own people. In the middle of dessert, as the president tells the story, he leaned over and told the Chinese president, well, they're hurting children, they're using chemical weapons against innocent people. Just so you know, I don't want you to hear it from somebody else. And he told him that relationship seems to have solidified greatly and is very underreported. How big a factor is it?
The biggest factor on these talks today of a player who's not in that room right now is China. And the fact that China, after that dessert or the chocolate cake and the 59 cruise missiles, after they
You've heard the story too.
Oh, indeed. Yeah. After they disappointed the president, because there was some kind of gelling there at Mar-a-Lago, but then afterwards they didn't produce what the president expected. When the president got even more serious, when he sent those tweets about Beijing did not step up to the plate, what happened? Within a matter of weeks, Beijing stops buying North Korean coal. One of the few things they have.
That was huge.
Right.
That was, you're right, and they bought American coal.
Right, and not only that, then China assists us in our banking sector sanctions on North Korea. If somebody told you just a year ago China's going to help us with sanctioning North Korea's financial sector, they would have sent you to the funny farm. But it happened. This is the Trump effect, and also I have to say here, it's Mike Pompeo. What Mike Pompeo has done behind the scenes, incredible.
Yeah,
truly incredible.
I agree. Mike Pompeo's a rock star. He came in first in his class at West Point. All right, we're a little jealous. All right, that's a little bit too much resume building here. All right, we're going to continue with our panel. Now, as you just saw moments ago, photo opportunity, the President, Kim Jong-un, they're now meeting. What is scheduled to be only a 45-minute meeting. We'll be watching the time. We'll see what happens. It is understood that the President might be they might be both going home after this all happens. For the very latest, we have right here with us in Singapore, Fox News Chief National Correspondent. Our friend Ed Henry is with us. Ed, what's going on?
Well, Sean, it's interesting you mentioned the timing. There was a lot of commentary back in the United States on some other channels that maybe because this schedule was getting compressed, that the deal was falling through. The president trying to extinguish any talk along those lines with some tweets right before these talks started, calling out what he called haters and others who were trying to talk all of this down. White House officials telling me that basically they had planned for the possibility of the president staying a second day for these talks to continue, but also knew that it might only be one day. Kim Jong-un basically indicating he wants to go home just a few hours after these talks, and now the president planning to do the same. But again, U.S. officials are cautioning us that could change based on what's happening right now, happening before our eyes behind closed doors. If they're making progress and need more time, they very well, both leaders, could extend their time here in Singapore. On the other hand, U.S. officials saying that in the pre-game talks, they feel like they made so much progress in terms of denuclearization and getting there on a reasonable timetable that perhaps under a compressed schedule, they can still get some kind of a peace deal or a framework for a peace deal, regardless of how long they stay here. So the very bottom line, as you were talking about Mike Pompeo a moment ago, the Secretary of State, a little scoop I heard was that about a week and a half ago, the president went with his family to Camp David. Mike Pompeo was supposed supposed to go there and brief him during some of his downtime to prepare him for this summit. But I'm told that Pompeo told his aides he didn't really need to brief the president anymore. He was very confident a week or so ago that the president was already very up to speed on all of the key issues. So you've had Democrats like Chuck Schumer say that this is seat of the pants diplomacy. They don't know what is going to happen on the ground here in Singapore. But I can tell you the president's team is very confident that A, he's prepared, and B, that they are closing in on some kind of a deal. We are waiting and watching very closely. At the top of the hour, Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, and Chief of Staff John Kelly will join this meeting between the president and Chairman Kim, an expanded bilateral meeting, as they call it, just over a half hour from now to try and figure out exactly what kind of a deal they can hammer out, Sean.
All right, great perspective, Ed Henry. Thanks for being with us here in Singapore. We stay in Singapore. Our own John Roberts is standing by, and we're watching history in the making, John. And I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that room.
Wouldn't that be an amazing place to be? Would be a fly on the wall, because here you have two leaders who were really throwing rocks at each other, and now we're shaking hands and being very cordial with each other. The president saying that they're going to have a great relationship. Kim Jong-un saying they've overcome a lot of very big obstacles in order to get together in that room. But again, the big question, because we haven't been exactly to this point many times in the past, because there's never been leader-to-leader talks, and there's certainly never been the president of the United States and the leader of North Korea in the same room together, just them and their translators. But we've been through a lot of negotiations with North Korea, and they've never really panned out. I mean, you had that agreement back in the early 1990s that seemed to go some distance to curbing North Korea's nuclear program. But with the one hand, they were getting rid of their plutonium program, and with the other hand, they were bolstering their uranium enrichment program. There's so much to talk about here, Sean. And the president has said on many occasions that they can't get it all done in one meeting, that what he hopes to do is start a process. If you look at language that Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, used yesterday, he said the ultimate goal is the complete, irreversible, and verifiable denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The ultimate goal. So what's the interim goal? The president has said, he told me when I threw a question at him, he'd like to do it all at once, but he knows that that's probably not realistic, because you can't just box up North Korea's nuclear program, put it on a fleet of transport planes, and take it to the United States in kind of the same way they did with the Libyan nuclear program back in 2003. It's much more massive. It also includes a big ballistic missile program. So that's going to have to be taken apart. And then there's this idea too, Sean, of verification. North Korea has always played hide and seek with its nuclear program, even when inspectors were allowed into the country. So to have something that is verifiable, and Pompeo stressed this again yesterday, that the V for verifiable is a big issue here. Until you get a program in place and you get cooperation from the North Koreans that they are going to be very transparent, absolutely transparent, and let you know everything you're doing, you're never really going to know what North Korea is up to. When you look at the history of this nation, they have always said one thing and done another. So if the president can get the two countries on the same track where everybody knows what's going on and North Korea really does want to denuclearize, then that's going to leave an open question. By the way, Washington Post just a short time ago had an update on Larry Kudlow. According to Judy Kudlow, his wife, she told the Washington Post, and the White House is working on a statement right now, that Larry Kudlow is fine, quote, fine, and that the doctors at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center are terrific and they're taking good care of him. So we're trying to get some independent verification of that, Sean. Haven't been able to at this point. I've been in touch with the White House. They're working on bird dogging this as well. But the word from Judy Kudlow through the Washington Post is that Larry Kudlow, quote, is fine. John?
All right, John, by the way, John, good news, great news, actually. I'm a friend of Larry's, and thank you for that report. We'll get back to John and Ed Henry. I want you to know what we're witnessing here. It's really history in the making. What is perhaps the most consequential week, by the way, in recent memory when you think about it. Now, moments ago, the president met personally with the North Korean dictator. They're now meeting one-on-one. The discussion expected to last around 45 minutes. It's going to be followed by a joint meeting and a working lunch with advisors from both sides. Now, the ultimate goal in these talks is the complete and verifiable and, by the way, irreversible denuclearization of North Korea. Korea. So we're going to show you why President Trump has already garnered more diplomatic success right here in this region than any other administration in modern history. There's a reason. It didn't happen by accident. We'll also discuss how the president's policies now forced Kim Jong-un to the negotiating table in the first place, the perspective and understanding we've got to learn these lessons, and how there are even people, Democrats, some in the media, they don't want to admit they've ever been wrong. They don't want to admit, oh, that the nuclear war that we're predicting didn't happen and peace may happen in its place. And by the way, we do have to announce that the president will be sitting down with us right here in Singapore for a one-on-one interview. That's all happening. You will hear directly from him what went on behind the scenes, what's actually happening right at this hour. We have so much to cover, and we're going to get to all of it in tonight's Breaking News Singapore opening monologue. All right, as we speak, the president is conducting a series of meetings with the North Korean dictator, Kim Jong-un. They just met, they shook hands, they had a photo op, and tomorrow the president will join us right here on this program for an important one-on-one, and he'll bring inside that room. But we begin tonight. How did we get here? And we want to detail the president's goals, how political opponents of the president are purposely trying to create artificial, unrealistic expectations so that they can say, oh, this is a failure, when we've gotten so much out of this already before it even started. No one predicted that these talks would immediately result in the complete and total denuclearization of North Korea. This is going to be a process. As the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said, well, the hard work actually begins after the summit. And it's very important to remember what President Trump, what he just said a few days ago. He told us exactly that this is a process. It's a long process. And here's what he said.
Our people have been in Singapore. Our people have been working very, very well with the representatives of North Korea. So we're going in with a very positive attitude, and I think we're going to come out fine. But I've said it many times. Who knows? Who knows? May not work out. It's a good chance it won't work out. There's probably an even better chance that it will take a period of time. It'll be a process.
So this is going to be an ongoing process. Kim Jong-un going, as the president said, he can go at his own pace. He can go faster, he can go slower. Now, obviously, we can't forget the untrustworthy nature of Kim Jong-un and his predecessors. We learned from history. Now, North Korea won't agree to our terms. The president, well, he stated many times he will walk away. That would be the right thing to do. He already canceled this meeting once, and they were kind of begging him to come back. One thing is certain. This president's not going to be duped into sending cash loads or cargo planes full of cash like Bill Clinton did in the 1990s, promising, oh, they'll never get nuclear weapons. We know that the former president, President Clinton's policy in North Korea was an abject failure. Kissing the rings of despots, it doesn't work. Trying to bribe them doesn't work. Frankly, it's a form of insanity. In order to avoid these historical mistakes and Clinton's blunder, well, we hope, President, and it seems to, leading up to this, well, the president is now following the lead of a predecessor named Ronald Reagan. And just like President Trump, Reagan deployed a policy, a philosophy of peace through strength, trust but verify, a very aggressive military posture. And just like Trump, Reagan had very tough words for America's biggest foe, the Soviet Union. For some of you, you may not remember this, but it's worth learning the lessons of history or we're doomed to repeat the failures. Take a listen.
They preach the supremacy of the state, declare its omnipotence over individual man, and predict its eventual domination of all peoples on the earth. They are the focus of evil in the modern world. So in your discussions of the nuclear freeze proposals, I urge you to beware the temptation of pride, the temptation of blithely declaring yourselves above it all and label both sides equally at fault, to ignore the facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire, to simply call the arms race a giant misunderstanding, and thereby remove yourself from the struggle between right and wrong and good and evil.
Right and wrong, good and evil, force of evil, evil empire. It's important to remember President Reagan was not afraid to walk away from the negotiating table. This is very key. Before effectively ending the Cold War, Ronald Reagan, in his 1986 one-on-one talks with Mikhail Gorbachev, without reaching any kind of deal, he walked away in Reykjavik in Iceland. And of course, tonight we have many reasons to be hopeful. Now, already, as I've been saying, in many ways, the U.S. has made more diplomatic progress right here, well, in North Korea, we're in Singapore, than any other previous administration. Kim Jong-un, he dismantled one of his nuclear testing sites. He stopped testing intercontinental ballistic missiles. Remember, he was firing them over Japan, threatening Guam, threatening the entire region, at least temporarily. That was back in December. And he ended all those nuclear tests. He released 3 American hostages. He walked across the DMZ and had friendly talks with the South Korean president, President Moon. And now, for the first time in history, he's sitting down right there as we speak, and without hesitation, without any concessions from the United States. This is a point the media hasn't made. None. Zero. He's given nothing. And we have gotten concessions that nobody predicted. And the president is demanding complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. This is obviously a worthy goal. You care about your kids, your grandkids, you want a safer world. This is a good day for you. At least we have hope. Now, it was primarily achieved. How did we get here? For 2 main strategic reasons. First, President's peace through strength strategy, it works. It works every time. Why don't follow it? I don't know. He sent multiple carrier strike forces to the region. He ramped up military drills. He tightened the screws on an increased sanctions program. The sanctions alone have crippled North Korea's horrible economy. So make no mistake, in North Korea today, their situation is dire. And Kim Jong-un's kingdom deals with widespread hunger and poverty. That is a threat to his power. And by the way, on a scale we're not seeing anywhere else in the world. And as Kim Jong-un comes here, he could take a look at just how beautiful South Singapore is and say, maybe we can do this in my country. Because the North Korean economy is so distressed. Even Kim Jong-un, remember, reportedly needed financial assistance to get a hotel room here in Singapore. I'll let him stay with me if he wants. I'll sleep on the couch. Anyway, it's a primary way. This is the important lesson. Trump forced Kim Jong-un to the negotiating table through an improved relationship with the Chinese president. China is North Korea's biggest ally, trading partner. Many analysts believe that China holds the key to a safe Korean peninsula. He can pressure Kim Jong-un and his regime like no other country. And so tonight, the world is watching. We're watching here in Singapore. And you still have people on the left, predictably. I've said many times that if the president actually gave $1 million or more to every American citizen, you'd have people on the left saying, why isn't it $2 million? And there are people that President Trump's success is a failure for them. In other words, they want these talks to go nowhere. You think the Democrats want the president to do well here? There are people who have been wrong about Donald Trump, our president, every single step of the way. Some pundits, so-called journalists, fake news, they claim, oh, Trump is leading us to a nuclear holocaust because of his tough words and actions against North Korea. The same people, let me see, they predicted and laughed at the idea that Trump could win the Republican primary. They laughed at the idea he could beat Hillary Clinton. The same people didn't believe that Trump's economic agenda would be this successful in 500 days. The same people who predicted President Trump would already be impeached by now. Now, of course, President Trump won the election. The economy is soaring. We have the lowest unemployment rate in half a century. We have more jobs available in America than we have people to fill them on the unemployment lines. The lowest unemployment rate in 14 states, lowest unemployment record for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, women in the workplace. More jobs available than people on unemployment. Pretty amazing for 500 days. GDP growth, it's at a faster pace than at any time during the 8 years of Obama. Oh, yeah, and President Trump is still in office. No legitimate threat of impeachment, not a shred of evidence about Trump, Russia, collusion. He's constantly wrong in the fake news media. These overpaid, lazy, so-called journalists, really? It makes them look bad when the president's successful and it helps our country and helps the world? Oh, and for Democrats, they want to get back in power. I get it. If he's successful, that doesn't help them. Anyway, once again, this has been on a grand scale. People have underestimated Donald Trump again and again. And sadly, even some of them want him to be failing so they can be proven right. And many are incapable of ever reporting objectively on this president. And by the way, now some are even claiming Trump wasn't prepared for the summit. Oh, they'll never win. Watch this.
He has been preparing for this all along in his imagination. No, there is a difference between studying up for it. This is not a dog who likes to learn new tricks. He relies on the same methods over and over again.
We've been told that Kim has been preparing for months. The president tells us he will depend on instinct, feel, and touch.
What I'm really worried about with President Trump is this whole thing, you know, I'm God's gift, I will go in a moment, and I will know within 30 seconds whether there will be a deal or not, and whether I know the history of North Korea doesn't matter, it does matter.
He said, I've been preparing all my life. I'd love to know, Mr. President, when was that? When you appeared in a Playboy softcore porn movie? Was it when you body slammed Vince McMahon, the head of the World Wrestling Federation? Or was it when you were leaking information, when you were disguising yourself as your own PR guy, talking to tabloids about what a great lover you were?
It's now so obvious and transparent to everybody where these people are coming from. The president said this is something you prepare for your whole life. You don't ever stop preparing. Now, the media, some of their friends in the Democratic Party, okay, they've got their position. We understand. And by the way, if the president succeeds, think about this. Is this good for the world or not good for the world? Good for your kids and grandkids or not good for your kids or grandkids? Anyway, bad news for them. That's sad. Anyway, we are, by the way, expecting momentarily, we think that Kim Jong-un and the president might be coming out for another photo opportunity. If that happens, we'll bring it to you live. We bring back Danielle Hoffman, Sarah Carter, and Dr. Gorka. I just think, for me, having watched Reagan and watched Reykjavik and watched the wall come tumbling down and watch history unfold, and it seems the parallels, Reagan was tough on Gorbachev and the Soviet Union. Reagan took a tough stand, evil empire, all these things. So many similarities, and the same people that were wrong about Reagan or seem to be wrong here.
Right. There's one more parallel that I'd highlight, and that was President Reagan's reliance on intelligence to make really good policy. And we've seen that with Secretary Pompeo. One of the first steps he made behind the scenes was to bring back a recently retired senior CIA clandestine services officer, Andrew Kim, who was a native Korean speaker with extraordinary subject matter expertise in the region. And it was Andrew Kim who accompanied Secretary Pompeo, then Director CIA Pompeo, on that Easter weekend trip to Pyongyang. And he's played a really critical behind-the-scenes role in preparation. I do know him.
Now, just for people that forget your background, and everybody here, we've all been meeting and talking with each other. Everybody here can verify, if you will, this. He scares the living daylights out of you. Daniel Hoffman will, no, and I mean this in the most complimentary way. It's not a bad thing that you say, oh, every conversation you have is being recorded here. Oh, by the way, when you take a shower, the Chinese, the Russians are watching. This is what you've been telling me since you got here. And I'm sure it's true. Right, not the shower part. I'm hoping there's a slight level of discretion here.
Yeah, I'm not so sure how interesting the shower part would be.
Thanks a lot, Daniel.
Yeah. But, you know, the level of interest obviously is so high in this summit. And there are enemies here tracking us, the Russians and the Chinese in particular.
You say that the highest level. You were very clear. You were telling all of us that electronic communications are being monitored everywhere here. There's no getting away from it.
I mean, that was my estimation, is that the Chinese and the Russians in particular have mounted a full court press in order to determine, in order to collect as much intelligence as they can. And they're pretty wide in scope when they do that. And they know this is an extraordinarily important meeting. And one of the things that the president has done, to his credit, is that he's kind of shut out Russia and China, two parts of the six-party talks who were not holding our interests at heart. And by doing that, and by trying to leverage our bilateral engagement with North Korea, I think he's had much more success. And so they're trying to influence the Russians and the Chinese from behind the scenes and collect information as well.
You know, look, you're our intelligence secretary. You and Gorka. I mean, you're almost. But the thing is, you spent 35 years. You lived in Russia, what, 5 years?
I did, but yeah, about 3 decades in the government. Yes.
3 decades. You understand this game better, as well as anybody. And in a lot of ways, this is what we're kind of dealing with a little bit.
That's right. Even back at home when we're talking about, you know, FISA and Carter Page and all the issues surrounding Mueller. But I wanted to go back really quick to what Daniel was saying. You know, the Chinese have so much at stake here. I mean, this is mainly Chinese. I mean, we're here at Singapore. They have a lot at stake here. They have a lot at stake with North Korea. So it's very important for them to understand what's going on. They definitely don't want to see a collapse of North Korea, Sean. They don't want to see the refugee crisis. They don't want another Chernobyl or something like that to take effect if the collapse of the North Korean government. So it's really important for them and their own national security interests, just like the United States has our own national security interests, to really understand what's going on here. Same with the Russians. And this is what Trump is so fantastic at. He's able to reach out. He says, okay, I'm going to keep you to the side right now. I'm reaching out to North Korea. I'm dealing with Kim Jong-un. I understand your concerns as well, but I'm negotiating with you, despite what the naysayers say, because we know he's been actually prepping for this for months. He's been prepping for this ever since November of last year, when they lifted off their ICBM.
You know, it was very hard to hear, and I think that's a great observation. It was very hard to hear, Dr. Gorka, when they were there for the photo op. They're answering a couple of little questions. We expect them to come out any moment, by the way, we're being told. But what we heard is, you know, Kim saying, overcoming everything, we are here. Trump saying, you know what, there will be a good relationship. Trump said, I believe it will be a very, very successful, without a doubt, there will be a good relationship. And then Kim Jong-un says the past and practices that grabbed our heels blinded our eyes and ears. Interesting comments. I don't know what you can glean from it, but it sounds a little bit like, I keep going back to the fact that Kim made all these concessions leading into this. One little news item that people don't pay enough attention to, that 3 old-time hardliners, I don't know if we'll use the word purged, expunged, removed, taking a vacation, you know, need to spend more time with their children, which is what you hear in the media when somebody gets fired. I need to spend more time with my kids. But that, to me, was maybe the most hopeful sign, that coupled with the missiles not being fired.
But why did that happen? And it goes back to, I think, the key element of your monologue, Sean. Why was Reagan successful, and why is Trump seemingly so successful? You can't win unless you believe in your team. And it's a very simple formula. If you start your presidency with a global apology tour, you're not going to negotiate your way out of a paper bag. You're going to give in to the mullahs in Iran. You're going to allow the Chinese to rise. You're going to respond to Russian invasion of the Ukraine by rolling over and playing dead. It's reinstilling faith in America. When you believe in your side, you can win negotiations. But when you go in there thinking, hey, we're the bad guys, you're going to get steamrolled. And nobody steamrolls Donald
the
Trump.
Apology tour. Think about Obama's earlier, right? He goes on an apology tour. I don't see Trump apologizing or bringing cargo planes of cash.
How are you going to positively
If he did, I didn't see it at the airport when I arrived.
How are you going to positively change the world if you think your country is the problem? Because that's what President Obama thought. We're the problem. Well, then you're going to get played by everybody, and that's what happened. And Donald Trump will never be played.
It's, you know, look, not even knowing the outcome. One thing is for certain, this is history in the making.
Right.
You know, leading up to this, and I actually thought Kim Jong-un had a very clever line about this, as, you know, he was sitting down with the president it was not easy to get here. It really wasn't.
On a Chinese plane. On a Chinese plane.
Yeah, he had to borrow a plane and apparently didn't have money for a hotel room. I offered him no, I'm kidding. I tried that joke. All right, we're going to get back to our panel here as we continue from Singapore. First, we have more information from our own John Roberts, who is with us here in Singapore, but did not go to dinner with us last night, but that's okay. How are you? John,
well,
can you hear me?
I'm available tonight, Sean. Yes, Sean, I can hear you. I'm available tonight if that offer is still open. You know, what we're seeing here, and the two leaders have been in the room together for a little more than half an hour now, is the very earliest stages of forming a relationship, and will give us the very earliest indications of how this could go going forward. The president's team, who are with him here in Singapore, know that the outcome of this one-to-one is the most important thing that is going to happen today, and it's probably the most important thing that has happened with the U.S.-North Korea relationship, if you want to even call it a relationship, in decades. The president wants to sit down with Kim. He wants to take a measure of him. He wants to gauge whether or not he is serious about denuclearization. He wants Kim to be able to see that President Trump is sincere about offering them economic incentives, offering security incentives, the potential end of the Korean War, and the potential for the normalization of relations with the United States, which ultimately would include normal trade relations, which could be a huge boon to North Korea. And the president said yesterday that he hopes the two of them will like each other so that they can move forward. So I don't think you can overstate the fact that everything that will happen from here on in is really pinned on the relationship that the two of them can develop with each other in this one-on-one. Now, if they continue to stay in that one-on-one, that's a really good sign. Because remember a couple of weeks ago when Kim Jong-chol, the vice chairman of North Korea, came to the White House, he was supposed to basically walk in the South Portico through the diplomatic reception room, down the colonnade, over to the Oval Office, hand the president the letter from Kim Jong-un,